Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Loki, Season 2, Episode 5. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. This is the continuing. I was not sure where this episode was going to go. I'm like, okay, we're picking up after last episode. Loki finds himself back in the TVA, but everyone's going, I'm like, wait, what? The TVA is completely empty, and all of a sudden, Loki starts time slipping again, and it's like, he's like, no, and it's like, wait, how is this happening? Like, everything's coming unraveled. He ends up seeing himself again. It's him, like, from a few minutes in the future, picking up a TVA handbook, which are like, that's so interesting because obviously the time frame, which is, time is all relative, and which is so interesting considering technically there's supposed to be no time at the TVA, but it's like the time frame between Loki pruning himself was like from episode 1 to episode 4, as we saw. But then like the time, I was like, maybe that's also supposed to be pretty significant that Loki ends up like that him running into himself, kind of like that Ouroboros of it all was an even smaller time window than at least in a conceptual sense of time. When you think about when he pruned himself, I probably did not explain that well, but it's such a small time frame between him becoming the other Loki on the end of that Ouroboros situation this time around, whereas it took a while to go for the prune situation. But then the TVA starts unraveling and everything becomes spaghetti. Which first and foremost, well, I think he'd already start slipping into other different places. Well, we saw the McDonald's, so I was like, okay, so that's with Sylvie, so where's this all going to take us? But he starts going back. I love that spaghetti effect. I was like, I really like that effect a lot because it's creepy, but it's dope in a beautiful yet effed up creepy way. You know, I didn't even think about it especially because the show kind of has that like 70s style and feel to it. It's like, it does heavily remind me of Legion. I mean, obviously, I guess this even more so because it feels like that'd be an effect you would see in Legion. I think that's why it kind of like correlates that even more in my head. I mean, especially when you consider, spoilers if you don't know, like the final season of Legion's a time travel season. So it's like, there's an even directer parallel in that regard too. But either way, he ends up traveling around, and I thought was so interesting as they kind of kept noting, he's on the branch timeline. He isn't, because he's not, and as OB or Doug says later, it is a situation that he isn't just traveling time, he's traveling space as well. Because he isn't just on the sacred timeline. He's working like his time slipping makes him basically a temp pad. He can teleport and time travel across not only like past and present and stuff like that, but and obviously, as we know, he can go to the future as well. But also, the fact is he can go to branch timelines. It doesn't just have to be on a sacred timeline or in the TVA. He's literally bouncing all over the place. When we got, like, the moment we opened up with, like, when we were at Alcatraz, I was like, the moment, like, we saw Casey, I was like, wait. I was like, Casey's a prisoner? I was like, wait. I was like, the mannequin head things. I was like, that seems so familiar. And I was like, wait. Casey is one of the dudes that escaped from Alcatraz? I was like, that's dope. It's kind of like how last season, you know, there was that little gag in episode 1 where we found out that Loki was DB Cooper. It's kind of like that. I was like, that's so interesting. But the thing is, what's really interesting too is like, it's a branch timeline, which makes you wonder, well, what happened to Casey or Frank, as his real name is? Which I should also know. I love that at the end credits, it uses like they don't keep their character names of like, oh, Mobius is Dawn, B-15 is Dr. Willis, Frank for Casey, Doug for Casey. So I thought that was such a neat little detail during the end credits, but it's like, yeah, what happened to the original Casey in the old, like, sacred timeline makes you wonder. Obviously, these are people pulled from branch timelines. But it's like, because I don't remember the Alcatraz story enough. I've never deep dived into it, but I've heard bits and pieces, because there's a theory, hey, they managed to escape and they lived, and then there's other theories they didn't. They actually died at sea. So part of me wonders, is that what the Nexus event was, that Casey survived and lived a different life, and maybe he's supposed to, I mean, maybe that's the MCU kind of being like, yeah, they died. Like I said, I think there's been constant, like, I think there's been updates to the story, but I've not kept up with it, and my knowledge is not, like, it's something I catch up with every once in a blue moon, but I don't deep dive enough to know where the current, because I think the last updates were like, I don't know if they know for sure. It's a pretty big theory that they most likely, in their attempt to escape, they drowned. So I don't know if that's where, like, me bringing real world knowledge, my limited real world knowledge about something historical and something in history, and kind of applying like the MCU spin to it. I'm like, I don't know if that's what that's supposed to indicate. But then he also ran into Dr. Willis, who, it's kind of like, B-15's a doctor. I don't know if she expressly, like, looks after, like, if she's, like, especially like a pediatrician, you know, a kid's doctor, or just, or maybe her patient just happened to be a kid. But it also fits, so I guess it's almost that thing of, it fits everyone's personality, because you have Casey, who is kind of very, you know, very crafty, and it's like, oh, you're a robber, so it kind of makes sense. B-15's kind of got that caring nature about her, that she looks after people, she cares about people. Her being a doctor makes perfect sense. Then you take Mobius. Yes, it turns out everyone's been asking for it since season 1, the jet skis. And it's like, he's a jet ski salesman. And it's like, oh, and especially when you get into his story, he's a single father of 2. His wife died. You're like, Jesus, Mobius had it rough. But once again, he had said it in episode 1, he can deal with, No. It was episode 2. He can deal with bad, but good. It's a hard thing to deal with. I mean, it's like, especially when Loki's asking for his help later, it's like, you're asking me to walk away from my sons. Now, I thought Loki was going to do something. I mean, he probably has to be within the general vicinity for his magic to work. I don't think they've ever really fully explored, like, could he keep an illusion up without being in the general area? Because I was about to say, not unless he creates, like, a fake illusionary, Dawn to kind of fill that role, but until the real Dawn comes back or something. He even promised to bring him back to his that moment. It's like, well, I'm sure you're not going to Doctor Who this. And by that, I mean, the Doctor's constantly like, oh, don't worry, you'll be back. It'll be almost like you never left. Oh, cool. Actually, I got the timey-wiminess of this wrong, and you've actually been going for 5 days. Sorry, I thought we were going back to the exact moment we didn't. So I doubt the same situation. It wouldn't be a Doctor Who situation in that capacity. They'd probably be able to get you exactly to where you left off. But yeah, God, like I said, that's so sad to kind of find out about Mobius in that regard. I mean, but he's still this chipper self, willing to, like, try and sell jet skis to people. It's also interesting to see the time frames, because obviously Casey from was like 1962. B-15 is from 2012. Well, she was taken in like 2012, and Mobius was taken in like 2022, which is also, like, once again, just even sadder, just thinking, like, lost his wife and his 2 kids, were left behind. And then we also catch up with OB, which there was constant questions about OB's circumstances of, once again, why is it that he's the only person that never had his memory wiped? Maybe there still will be something deeper there. Some people were wondering maybe he wasn't even human, but if he has a life on a timeline, so that means he is human. You did assume. And it also turns out he's a science fiction author. He ended up becoming like a scientist only because it was the only way he could basically compensate for not being able to write his books. And I love, that was so sad. He basically snuck his book into a library. He's like, oh yeah, I'm trying to check this out. Oh, let me just pay for this. And the lady's like, it's you. You got to stop putting your books on a bookshelf trying to get them out to people, because he's trying to sell his book. That's actually really, it's like kind of wholesome and sweet, but also super sad. And even later on when he meets up with Loki, he's like, oh, and I might have a copy of a book somewhere, saying that despite the fact is the place is filled with his books. And he's like, oh, look, I got a copy right here. You're such a lucky guy. But yeah, like, because he handles it. I love that we do get a little bit of the OB-isms of it all, because he's trying to tell Loki, like, okay, you told me that you time traveled in a place where it shouldn't be possible to time travel, the TVA. So you getting back to a place that doesn't technically exist should be possible, because you've already done the impossible. And if the impossible is possible, then how is this impossibility any less possible than the other impossibility? So I love that explanation of, like, right, there's science and there's fiction. Like, the science, what was it? You explained that the what and the how. The science fiction of it all is the why. No, the fiction of it all is the why. Because it's like, right, if you can control your time slipping, like, what do you want? He's like, I want to save the TVA. Let that be your motivation. And it's very reminiscent of when he first got to the TVA. He tries to, like, use his magic, but it won't work. I'm surprised he didn't use that to try and convince people. God, I think it's really interesting. And then maybe this speaks volumes about these branch timelines, that none of them recognize him as Loki. This is the same Loki that attacked Earth. So it's like, I wonder, because we also don't know. Well, I can only assume. I'm curious, are they all from the same branch timeline? So did Kang take, He Who Remains, did he snatch people all from the same branch timeline? Or are they all from, is Casey from a different timeline? Did OB... Or are all four of them from different branch timelines? Because now I'm also wondering, like, the fact is that, I mean, at the very least, OB's from, like, 94, but B-15 was from 2012, so it's like, did Avengers not happen in your timeline? Has it just not happened yet? So is that why you didn't recognize Loki? Dawn is in 2022, which is interesting timeline-wise, because that would be during the blip. So that means in that branch timeline, maybe the blip never happened. Because also, once again, it's like, you wouldn't recognize, none of you recognize Loki. Like, it was a big enough thing, I mean, mainly, I don't know how, once again, it's that question that we have pop up from time to time in the MCU. We don't know how much the general public knows about stuff. We pick up stuff here and there in Miss Marvel about what the general public knows, because Scott put out his book, so a lot of that's known, but that's from Scott's perspective. He wasn't there during the OG Avengers. Well, I was about to say, we do have Rogers the musical, so they do know about Loki because he's part of the musical, if I remember correctly, and So that's why I'm like, yeah, like, the fact is no one, like, if he wasn't like, oh, I'm Loki, like, the fact is that it immediately registered anyone, no one flipped out or freaked out, makes me think in their timelines, in their branch timelines, Avengers never happened. Makes you wonder, do the Avengers even exist in their timelines? And if they do, like, or maybe just Loki never, because that could also be like a what if situation, because what happened to Loki and What If is episode 7. We find out, like, in that one, Loki was never adopted by Odin and Freya. Not Freya, Frigga. He was brought back to the ice giants, the frost giants. So he grew up with his own people. So this could be those type of circumstances as well. Or maybe just things are different. It makes you wonder, are these branch timelines that any of the Lokis we met last season in episode 4, could any of these Lokis be from that type of time? A lot of questions on that front. But yeah, Loki tried to go and get Mobius, but Mobius is like, nah, man, oh, we're friends. No, we are friends, because he's getting a little nervous, because it's like, oh, do you live in the area, or did you just happen to follow me home? It's like, yeah, that does seem weird, but I think it's also part of Mobius just being like, oh, come in, I want to show you this. He's going to sell his jet skis because need 2 of them because his wife died, and it's like, don't really need this anymore. Plus the kids are probably going to need like a math tutor, or maybe like braces or something in the future. But then OB or Doug shows up, and it's like, oh, how'd you get the time pad working so quickly? I wouldn't call it quickly, because it took me 18 months. Well, actually 19, because I needed to take a break after I got kicked out of my home and my wife left me. It's like, oh, poor Doug, Jesus. But it's like, yeah, Mobius, don't worry, come with me. We'll get the squad together, because I skipped over it, but I loved OB or Doug's explanation of, well, basically, you got to get the squad together, because if you can focus on their temporal energy, because all of you were together when the loom got destroyed. So if you can focus on that temporal energy, you'll be able to lock onto that moment in the TVA and rewind and like get back there. You can lock onto that signature, even though you don't really know how to get to a place that technically doesn't exist, right? So slowly goes around and gathers everybody up. And the last person on the list is Sylvie. And what's interesting, though, is that Sylvie remembers. Because I think that does speak... Part of me wonders, is that supposed to be indicative of... Well, because all the branch timelines were destroyed, but... Because like everyone's supposed to go back to where they belong. But the fact is, Sylvie nor Loki went... I mean, Loki's circumstances of the time slipping maybe had a factor in that. But what about Sylvie? She didn't return to her original timeline. She went to the timeline that she considers home now. Because I'm wondering, is that supposed to be indicative of at least the others, either their branches were still alive even though they were being pruned, but it's like that doesn't explain everything considering there was only the sacred timeline in season 1. So why is it that they all ended up in their own and Sylvie did? Well, to be fair, Sylvie can she still has the TemPad, so she can kind of go wherever she wants to. So maybe before shit hit the fan at the end of the episode, like before it really hit the fan, she TemPadded over to... I mean, because she also has a special TemPad. It's He Who Remains, so maybe that kind of plays a role in it. So that's why her memory didn't get wiped, because she didn't get put back in her OG timeline, because like there's probably like no guarantee that her like she built a life for herself here, and that's the life she comes to know. Like her life on Asgard wasn't that much because she was a child, so she doesn't really remember it that much anyway. So this is more home than anywhere. So she, regardless, the thing is she remembers everything, and I'm just not quite sure the reasoning and explanation for that. And Loki's trying to talk to her, and they had this... I could see why people have their issues with Sylvie. I don't know if everyone feels this way, but I've heard some opinions of people not being the biggest fan of Sylvie. I mean, but it's also like, I understand like her selfish desire, because I mean, for one, we have a tendency to be selfish. I mean, but that's not just a Loki thing. That's everyone can be selfish thing. It's just a question of, whether like, because what's selfish to one person, could also be selfish to someone else, but it could just be your point of views. Sylvie wanting to live her life is like, yes, that's selfish, but that's anyone wanting just to live their lives, That's what the whole point of this free will thing is supposed to be. But for Loki, it's like, no, like, we should all get back together. It's our only way to save the TVA. And for Sylvie, it's like, yeah, but they're happy. They're in their lives. Do you want to take them away from that? Like, He Who Remained didn't give them a choice. And Loki's like, yes. So that's why we should give them a choice now. But for Sylvie, it's like, once you've opened that Pandora box, you can't close it. You're going to show them something they can never unsee. And even if they go back to their lives, it will never be quite the same. You've kind of opened their eyes, and there's no, like, closing Pandora's box after that. So... like I said, I understand why people kind of might be, some people at the very least that I've kind of heard are kind of miffed on like the way Sylvie's kind of approaches, but I also understand her perspective. We're talking about someone, once again, who has been on the run for most of her life. She's also had to deal with like, where does she hide out there in the universe? She hid in worlds that were she basically lived in the destruction of thousands of worlds, because she hid in apocalypses her entire life. Whenever she eventually figured out that's how she hides herself. So it is that thing of, when you've grown up like that, when you no longer have to run anymore, you're going to take that opportunity of like, I want this. I want to live here. I don't want to go back. Like, why? Because she already made it clear last episode she does not agree with the TVA existing, because it's like, we got to give people free will, and she does not agree with Loki, which even that's a complicated road of like, okay, you want to give Loki the benefit of the doubt, but it's like, right, you want to say like, oh, well, we'll be different from He Who Remains. It's like, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. Who are you to be able to dictate, oh, you're kind of stepping out of your path, yada, yada, so on and so forth. And Sylvie kind of gets to the heart of it. It's like, why are you doing this? It's like, I want to save the TVA. It's like, no, try again. Why do you want to? And he's like, I want to be with my friends. Because being a Loki is a very lonely existence, because it is something that you kind of, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy of you end up being alone. I mean, it actually parallels really neatly with the time loop last season, where Sylvie, not Lady Sith, was kind of like, you will always be alone. Loki doesn't want to be alone anymore. He has friends now. Like, this is kind of his makeshift family outside of his actual family. And because Loki had a family, but he was always so outside from everyone else because of his upbringing, it kind of made him feel more, obviously he was very mischievous, and so a lot of people were not the biggest fan of him. Plus, like, he was angry and he was lashing out against people, and so he'd even had that sweet moment with Mobius where he was talking about, like, right, you saw something in me that I never could have seen in myself. You saw the potential of the person I could be. I'm a better person now because of you, Mobius. You know? And, you know, these people mean something to him, and he doesn't want to lose his friends. He wants to be with them. And it's like, see, Loki, you're being selfish. And even she's like, but that's not a bad thing. I get it. But also it's like, you know, I'm not just the only one being selfish here. You're selfish too, because it isn't your reason. You want to justify, but like, it's about saving the TVA. It's like, no, you want to save the TVA because it's what binds you and your friends together. Without that, you're like, where are we? I'm back to being completely and utterly alone. And so he goes back kind of defeated, you know? And it's kind of like, well, it's all not worth, you know? You guys should go back to your lives. And it's like, didn't you say they were in danger? And I think for Loki, it's like, because for him, I think he saw the TVA getting destroyed, but he didn't realize that was going to bleed out all across time and space. Our first real instance of really seeing that was in Sylvie's world when, like, her food disappeared. She notices that, but she didn't see it disappear the way it did. So she didn't realize, like, because they thought, like, okay, the timelines are going to be fine. The only thing that's happening is that the branches are spreading out and everything's going to be a free run. And it's like, because this was the main problem is Loki's trying to prevent, like, by having the TVA back, we can stop all the Kang variants that are going to be running rampant, and the start of a multiversal war, like a whole bunch of devils will be on the way. That's what that was mainly meant to be, but obviously, like, once again, that was just a excuse just so he could be together with his friends, because the TVA is what brought them together. It's what keeps them together, and without it, we're all kind of going our separate ways and living our lives, and it's like, right, I should just let you live your lives. I even love Casey being like, oh, or Frank being like, oh, like, it's Tim pad. It could take me anywhere. A park, inside a bank vault. I was like, oh boy. But then when it disappeared, he was like, but I didn't take it. I was like, what? I was like, come on. And then he starts fading away. I was like, oh shit. And then it's like, oh, he didn't take it. It faded away. Then OB fades away. So because this was after Sylvia had showed up being like, yeah, everything's falling apart. And so does Mobius, and then B-15, and then Sylvie. And it's just this sad moment of just everything. And, like, you see the desperation in Loki as he's trying to grab onto everything, and he's thinking about words from each and every one of them. And in that moment, he ends up rewinding time. Like, he ends up, like, time traveling to, like, a minute or so earlier. And it's like, I did it. Because it's like, no, he did it a little bit. And Sylvie had been like, oh, it's on, like, he rewound basically like a couple seconds. God, what was I don't remember what it was. It was like a movie or TV show. I don't remember what it was. Oh, I'm so stupid. It's a TV show. It reminded me, it's not the same thing, but it kind of gave me the same vibes as 5 from the Umbrella Academy. Specifically in that moment he has in the season 2 finale. Which is such an amazing moment, being able to kind of, like, have better control of his power. It kind of gives me that parallel. I thought that was kind of, it kind of gives me that same feeling vibe. And so what I think it's so interesting is, like, Loki kind of goes back like a few seconds, then he goes back like a minute or two, and he's got control of it now. And I love it. It's like, it's not about when and where or why. It's about who. It's about what he's focusing on. And for him, it, like, when he's saying that and thinking that, he is turning towards Sylvie. I'm probably misremembering, because it seemed like he was implying, like, what really set that apart was just because what he needed to focus on, it needed to be on who, and who is he doing this for? He's doing this for his friends, maybe, you know, also Sylvie, like, because that's still like, well, we haven't really discussed who and what we are now, but it's because everything else is going on. But He thinks he can do it now. He's got better control of it. And in that moment, he rewinds to the end of episode 4, and episode ends. I was like, dude, I love that, because it is that interesting thing of you started where you began. I mean, once again, the Ouroboros of it all. It's like, right, the end is, once again, I love that about the 12 Monkeys. I assume it's applicable to the movie, but when I reference 12 Monkeys, I always talk about the TV show because it's my favorite time travel show, making it my favorite science fiction show in general. But it's just like, right, the end is the beginning and the beginning is the end. Once again, the whole Ouroboros of it all. But it's like, right, you began this journey, and the journey of self-discovery and growth has allowed you to go back to what was the end of last episode. Now, the question is he going to stop Victor from going out there and becoming spaghetti? Because if he does, what does that mean in the long run if Victor Timely didn't die? Now, obviously, there's the theory of people saying, like, well, that event is going to lead to him becoming He Who Remains. That depends on how they play that all out. Because my theory last episode was like, are we going to get a time loop episode where Loki's trying to fix things? Episode 6 could end up being the time loop episode where it's just like, okay, Loki's like, I'm going to travel back in time, and okay, oh crap, this didn't work. Let me do it again, and so on and so forth. Like, that keeps happening, which... I mean, I guess the fabric of space and time is already collapsing, so I don't think there'll be too much issue if you cause further collapse, considering who knows what the ramifications could be with him time slipping like that. I mean, him doing it himself seems a little bit different than, like the TemPads. It feels like there might be more consequences for him just doing it. Like, you feel like that you can't just do that willy-nilly. A time device seems a little different. And once again, even then, I don't know. Maybe there won't be any issues, but I feel like that is some like breaking of time, this space-time continuum stuff, that it feels like at least the door, like the TemPads are more stable, except for OBs, which I love that the whole door is like constantly moving because it's very rough. Which I also forgot that line from where OB was like, because Loki handed him his book and he's like, yeah, you wrote this. He's like, so I do become a best-selling author. And Loki's like, yeah, sure, something like that. It's like, no, because everyone has one of those books, but no one's read them except for Casey and Timely. So it is kind of like, yeah, it's on everyone's desk. No one's really read it, though. But, you know, and it's also one specific place. It's specifically in a place where time technically is not supposed to exist. So it's kind of hard to say it's really a bestseller. But I thought that was kind of neat. But like I said, I could definitely, like I said, because it's a time travel thing, and we've yet to have like a full time loop episode. Like I said, we've utilized time loop because of last season with the whole Lady Sif of it all. But like next episode could be like kind of a time loop episode if they really wanted to go into it. I thought the explosion might have caused a time loop, but Loki having his time slipping and now being able to control it could be. But the problem is when you fix a lot of that stuff, you have no idea the butterfly effect of what that could turn into. Like maybe Timely's story could have played out this way, but then maybe now that you're doing this, like either you save Timely and that causes consequences later on, or you keep going back further trying to fix things and that causes more issues. It's going to be hard to say. And now we also go back to the whole, biggest question of all. Is this still all on Kang's path? They even showed it at the beginning. It's like, right, everything was the path laid out before you. So even this with Loki might have been part of the plan. Maybe even this all came out of, maybe Kang had the 40 chess foresight to see how far in advance this could all play out when you're able to kind of know everything. Or, well, up to a certain point. Or could it be that even, this is no longer on Kang's path? Not everything's working out the way he planned. Who knows? We'll have to wait to see where the season finale takes us. We don't even know. It might even be a series finale. Because obviously we didn't even know there was going to be a season 2 of Loki until they announced it at the end of the season. Where it's like, yep, it's revealed, at the post-credits, Loki will return for season 2. So at this time of me recording this, maybe that information's out there. I haven't heard anything, so probably maybe even Marvel Studios hasn't decided because, a lot has to, be considered how this plays out and what this means for the future. There's a lot of, that's a larger conversation about everything at Marvel Studios being in flux. So much of the future of where the storyline could go, once again, the Kang stuff is still up in the air of once again, the conversation of you're going to pivot to a different villain, we recasting. Even though the Jonathan Majors of it is he is going to trial, and are they going to wait for a verdict, or are they going to take preemptive actions? that's, once again, a whole other conversation. So it is that thing of, you want to keep it to the fictional side of things, but there are real world things that are happening that will massively influence the decision that Marvel Studios makes, you know? So like I said, we'll see, because they might not do a season 3 because they probably want to go like, okay, let's lead this into other stuff. And maybe later on down the road, if we feel necessary, we might circle back to a season 3, or maybe they'll have that decision made by the time the season finale airs. Or like I said, or maybe they make it definitive, like, no, we have no intentions of making a 3rd season. It will be a series finale. We'll ultimately have to wait to see how it all plays out, and ultimately where this all takes us and where it ends up. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.